Hello, humans. It's your host, Kory from a Well Cared for Human podcast. And today we are with the amazing Shereen Thor. She wears many hats. She's a public speaker. She's a two times TEDx speaker, a comedian turned coach, and an author and an all around baddie who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a hot minute now. And I'm so excited to have her here on the show to share her with you. So, welcome, Shereen.
Thank you so much, Kory, for that sweet introduction. Can we do it again? Making me
Yes,
feel good about myself, girl.
we can do it as many times as you want. Would you just sit here and repeat your amazing accomplishments to you if you want? But
Pretty sure the
anyway,
audience would get bored pretty quick, but
no, no, absolutely not. You have amazing energy. And because you're an amazing baddie out there doing you, you're an executive coach, entrepreneur, keynote speaker. All of this is evidence that you're a really ambitious person. And that's where I want to start because I know many of our listeners, if they're trying to build their own business or they are doing anything that requires a bit of ambition in their life, it can be really hard to factor in self-care when you're a driven person. And so from that perspective, thinking about how we keep pushing it down the to-do list every chance we get to do these other things. Tell
mm,
me, what does wellness and self-care look like for you as an entrepreneur, as a mom, as this person who's trying to do a lot in the world? What does it look like for you?
that's a great question. And I really actually think part of my self-care and part of my wellness was honoring my ambition. Like, I know that's like a backwards answer and probably not what people would expect, but I think in a lot of ways, as women, we are expected to fulfill roles, right? Like the dutiful wife, the dutiful daughter, the good friend, the self-sacrificial martyr mother. And I think
For
for
sure.
me, the one place in my life that wasn't fulfilling a role was this dream of being my full, authentic comedian, coach, creative type person
For
in my
sure.
career. With that, to your question, there is that energy of how do you balance, right? The ambition and the pushing and the wanting and the striving and the creating versus the part of you that's like, I would really like to Netflix and chill and not be on right now. Yeah, that's definitely been a big balance. And I don't have it perfect, right? We're always like still figuring it out. But I think for me, it's almost been finding accountability. So like, oh, I'm going to like schedule a massage and then I will have to show up at that appointment because I paid for it, like, or I'm gonna have a friend who I walk with once a week, which will feel fun and social and get me outside, but also move my body. So really kind of finding almost like accountability anchors to force it into the schedule. Because honestly, left to my own devices, I'll just like overeat and watch TV.
That's my favorite. I love snacking. I like I keep snacking. There was a popular meme or like video that I saw recently, and it was like there was a woman, she was in the cabinet and she was like just stuffing all the snacks in, and her person walked by and was like, I thought you were supposed to be writing, and she was like, this is part of it. This is part of the process. And I had never related to anything more in my life. I was like, you're right. I
Oh,
do need 10 snacks before I sit
oh
down
yeah,
and I write.
totally. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Yes, there's so many things. When I was writing my book, I would leave our life and our house with our kids and our chaos in Santa Monica, and I would drive like 2 hours to San Diego and be in solitude, but it would have to be like a Friday to Sunday, like a full weekend,
Yeah.
because the first day was just self-care. It was just like snacks and leisure and a massage and a mani-pedi and
Hmm.
avocado egg rolls from my favorite restaurant because it's like the first day was like the decompression off of like other people's energy and what everybody wants and being in the hustle and bustle of life and needing to like almost reset my nervous system. And
For
then
sure.
like the morning of day two, I could be like, okay, now I have some thoughts and creativity because I've been, taken care of.
You're like, now I feel like a person again. What did I come here for?
Well, see, and like that's kind of what I mean, like to your question of the ambition, like how do you honor your ambition? And it's like the truth is, I was like a mom, like I need, like my ambition was giving me an excuse to check into a hotel for a weekend. If I didn't have a book I was writing, and I told my husband, hey, I really just want to check into a hotel for a weekend, to be like, yeah, and no, and it just would have been like like a frivolous idea or oh, you're just trying to be spoiled. But it was almost like because it was work, I got to justify it. Yeah, so it's kind of weird. I feel like I'm supposed to give some sort of different energy, like answer, but I'm like, no, that's really kind of it in a weird way. my career gave me permission to steal away and get a massage and get a hotel for the night. And I was like, I'm so smart.
No, actually, it makes a lot of sense. It's reminding me of, did you ever take the Clifton Strengths? It was like big in the business world for, I mean, maybe it still is really big, but when I had to take it, it was like to identify your top strengths. And one of mine is achiever, no surprise to anyone who's ever had a conversation with me. But it talks about how in order for achievers to feel good, they have to get things done. And so if you know that about yourself, if you know that part of your self-care is a certain level of getting things done, feeling like you're making progress, and honoring that is part of self-care. And so it is about that balancing act, which you just talked about, which is, I think a lot of us don't consider self-care as something that is ongoing necessarily. So that's why I like to frame it as a relationship in the four pillar method that I talk about as a well cared for human, because it's something you're always working with. Relationships are always in conversation, right? You're always building them or something happens to test them and you have to repair. And so I like that idea that it's just a balancing act. Like it's okay to want to be really productive, and then it's okay to stop and have 10 snacks. It's all good. It's all
Right?
part of taking really great care of yourself.
Yeah, I love that.
You've also told me before in our conversations that you have ADHD. I won't say struggle. A lot of people say I struggle with ADHD, but not everyone struggles with it. It's just something that's a part of your neurochemistry.
Mhm.
I like the term neuro-spicy. And so I know that a lot of our listeners are also neurospicy in different ways. And so what do you think are some unique self-care challenges for people who are neurodivergent in any kind of way? Like what does that do to the equation of this balancing act?
It's such a good point. I didn't figure it out until I was 39. And I didn't figure it out till after I had kids. And it was mostly because I think it was a lot more obvious after having kids. It's like, now you don't have like your own plate to just spin. It's like I'm spinning my plate, and then I'm also spinning like my kid number one and kid number two. And then it just all started to fall off. So I think I started to be more of a hot mess as a mother, to be honest. And then also, I was watching dirty reality TV like I do when I'm chilling. And one of the contestants who I then followed on Instagram started to do podcasts and talk about how women were often overlooked in terms of getting diagnosed when they were younger because they aren't as impulsive and they're not as expressive with it. They can be sort of detached with it or inattentive, as they call
I'd
it.
heard that, yeah, like the symptoms show up differently in girls, and especially how we're conditioned socially, that it presents itself differently. So
Exactly. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, is that what it is? Because there were just these certain things I would say, like, oh, I just needed to get out of the house and I needed to go for a walk or I couldn't think. And that felt normal to me. That's just how I felt. But like eventually I was like, I don't know that that's how every mom feels. Like, I don't know that every mom is like, I actually can't think in this noisy environment. And so it
mhm.
was just like a combination of like things that made me look into it. I actually went to a testing center in Manhattan Beach, ended up getting officially diagnosed, and she said I didn't really have as much hyperactivity. Maybe I did when I was younger, but at the ripe old age of 39,
We're
she was
slowing down anyway.
totally
When we're
right.
getting older, we're like our batteries are
Exactly. I got my
like one of
cane
those
out.
toys that like
Right.
start
I'm
going.
growing
"Arr."
up the gray hairs. Yeah, totally. So she was just like, you're not as hyperactive, but you definitely are inattentive. And so then it was sort of like, oh, ding, 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 ding. Like now I can look back at the like domino effect of my life, and a lot of things made more sense. Like
Right.
me missing flights because I couldn't get dates right when I had like an internship in college. I like missed a training in Georgia. It was like moments where it just felt like what a screw up I am. Like I'm such a
Yeah.
screw up. I was like, I can't keep it together. And then here I am at 39 going like, oh, I'm neurodivergent, and so details can be harder for me. I wasn't necessarily a screw up. So I think the first thing it did for me was like give me a lens to view myself through that was a little more accurate and self-compassionate. So that was very helpful.
Yes.
Uh, you know, and right after that is when I decided to move from Southern California, which can be very noisy and trafficy and insane, to Indiana, which is like calm. And so I do think,
I can't imagine the shift from Indiana,
I
California
know.
to
And I think that that is
greater.
actually one way that I have coped, right? Is like actually just choosing a place to live that has less noise and less traffic. And It's just less problematic for me to be less perfectly on top of it. I
Mhm.
also think in hindsight, of course, didn't know this while it was being figured or sorted, it was my career choice is a very neurodivergent career choice. Apparently, people who have ADHD are 300 times more likely to start a business.
Oh,
They're like
interesting.
worlds more creative. Yeah. And so I like when I was starting my business, I didn't know I had ADHD. But again, looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, so many things make sense about like why I've
This
chosen.
is why that happened.
Exactly. Yeah. And even, I remember working in an office and I remember feeling like, how do people just like hold their emotions together on a bad day and just be the office person who's professional? Like, I remember breaking down and crying. I had a
Oh,
situation with my dog that was really heart-wrenching. And I remember like actually breaking down and crying and being like, I can't function in an office where I have to like kind of be inhuman all the time. So I think one of the ways I've cared for my neurodivergentness is choosing a career, not only a business where I like didn't have to answer to a boss, because let's be honest, I'm insubordinate as shit. But also, you know,
we like the rebel because the title of your book is revolutionary. Tell me
it's
again the title.
Revolutionary Woman and chapter
Yeah,
one is Awaken the Rebel.
yeah.
Yes.
So right on brand for you.
Oh, yeah, so I think just like one, I'm not the most subordinate employee, but two, I love working at home in solitude. There's not a
Mhm.
person here to distract me or divert me. And, sometimes I lose myself in the snack pantry. But
That's okay. That's a safe place to lose yourself.
exactly. But for the most part, it's like, let's say I have a moment where I do want to break down and cry because something is actually really upsetting. Like, there's
Yeah,
nobody to hide from. You know what I mean? Like, I've given myself like an environment that was conducive to my needs as an ADHD person all the while not knowing that's what I was doing. But I think to your point, the way that I have cared for my neuro-spiciness is being self-aware and self-honoring. Just kind of being like, who am I? What do I need? Okay, give myself that. Who am I? What do I need? Okay, give myself that. Even if it didn't make sense, or even if it felt like I was spoiling myself, or whatever, like weird, stupid, criticisms we give ourselves. I think I just was like real committed to it because I was honestly committed to happiness. That's really what it was at the time. Was like, I just want to be happy and this is what's gonna make me happy. It's like, let's go. So,
that is so admirable. Like if we could all just be like, I'm committed to my happiness. Like I think we would
right?
all be less miserable people, but it's so hard to do that. And
Mm,
thinking about what you're saying, so I'm always reminded of the four pillars of a well cared for human, your relationship with your body, your relationship with your mind and emotions, relationship with spirit, which is also part of this honoring yourself, meaningful work, that creativity that you've been touching on. And then your relationship with connection, which is that bravery of connecting with others, even if maybe
mm.
we've been crushed in the past by terrible mistakes. And so
Yeah.
thinking about that those four pillars and kind of the experiences that you've had, which has been the most challenging in your context? And it could be any of them, or you could speak about
Mhm.
all of them, but what are the particular challenges? Because I've heard you mention like the managing the negative self-talk, which we all struggle with, like not beating
Mhm.
ourselves up inside our own heads. So, but what
Totally.
has been really hard for you in particular?
So body, mind, spirit, and relationships and connection, right? Those are the four.
Connection. Yeah, the fourth pillar, I focus more on connection because, yes, relationships with other people are important, absolutely, but it's more like your relationship with connection, that vulnerability, putting yourself out
Mhm.
there, willing
Mhm.
to trust other people. And so that
Mhm.
it's more focused on that aspect than necessarily another person, like how you be
Yeah.
good to another person. It's how are you okay with being vulnerable? Like, are you okay or do you freak out? And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
no. So,
I think if I was to pick one that I struggle with the most, it's probably my relationship with my body. I think because in a lot of ways, like one of my negative expressions of, let's call it ADHD or whatever, is probably, no, truly actually is like food as a coping mechanism. So that's something I'm trying to get better at and figure out and learn and be better at this juncture of my life. Though I think earlier on it was probably connection. I think a lot of my work that has now like come to fruition and feels like a success, most of it before it was a success was me just like trying to be myself, right? Like, is it okay to be myself? Like, can I be
for
authentic?
sure.
Can I be a creative type instead of like the doctor or the lawyer or the engineer that my immigrant mother wanted me to be? Like, is it safe?
Yeah.
will I be hungry and not be able to eat? Is she correct about like you should choose something that will help you survive?
We don't want her to be right.
Don't want her to be right. Yeah. And then luckily now she's not. Now
Mhm.
I've worked hard enough as an entrepreneur long enough to be like, oh, okay, I've created stability. So now I know I am safe to be this person. But I didn't know for a long time. Like I was a
Yeah.
very struggling artist, struggling entrepreneur for the majority of my career. And so, it's kind of like I think that was a pain point, and that was something I was always like striving and trying for, trying to make it okay for me to be myself, trying to justify the choices I've made, trying to not be a broke entrepreneur anymore so that I could prove my mom wrong, right? Like just a lot of
Yeah.
like trying and struggling and failing and trying. I actually just binge watched. Okay, talking about Netflix. Rhythm and Flow. It's kind of like American Idol for hip hop and rap, basically.
Oh, I haven't
Like,
heard of it. Yeah.
oh my God, so good. They only have two seasons. But season one, there's a singer. Oh my God. No, not a singer. He's a rapper. He's so good. His name is Flawless Real Talk. And he did this
What a
song.
great name.
Yeah, yeah, right. He is flawless and he does do real talk. But he basically has a song like about how he's on his way. And it's kind of describing the struggle that I am describing. It's like
Mhm.
he's talking about how he struggles and he has these kids and he wants to share with his kids that you get to go after your dreams and that your passion will move you and drive you. And but he was like, but the money's not matching what I'm made for. And I'm like, oh my God, I feel that so hard. Like,
Yeah.
literally makes me
I'm
want to
not being
cry.
paid what I'm worth.
Oh my God, exactly, right? Like that struggle of being like an artist who is about something and is like fighting for something and wants to do something meaningful and make an impact and be the truth of yourself. But you're tired and you're like broke. And I think this is just to that question of self-care, because there
Yeah.
were moments in my career where it was like, your commitment to your art and your commitment to your cause is actually hurting you now. Like
Mm.
you need to reel it in. And I will honestly say that probably happened 3 years ago, 3 years ago, where I was like, I need to calm down on my commitment to like my art and like what I'm doing, because what I need is to be a well cared for human who basically can eat and can survive. And so I started to really look at my business through that lens of like, what's actually just going to work? What's just going to make me money? I'm not going to give up the fight for the art. Let's go. But
Mhm.
also, what will give me stability, ease, flow? What will relieve stress? What will bring in enough money on a regular ass basis to where I'm not like chasing all the time? Like, and
Yeah.
answering those questions is ultimately what created the stability in my business for me to have a calm nervous system and function,
I'm like, we are all want to calm nervous system.
right?
I
Like,
don't
and
know
just
that I have that all the time yet, but I'm working.
totally,
I'm
totally.
inspired by you.
Oh, don't worry. I still fight it. There are months where the business dips and I'm like, what are we gonna do?
And you're like, don't panic, and then panic.
Yeah. And the truth is that's how it used to be every month, right? It just and you could feel that in my marriage. It was like a strain between my husband and I. You could feel that in a lot of different areas of my life. So I don't know, it's hard for me to actually even pick one pillar because I think in a lot of ways they just all pop up at different times.
Yeah, it's a crapshoot. What's going to make you nuts one week versus the other? But I do understand so much about what you're saying about the ambition and that balance because I had a very similar experience, and I'm kind of coming out of that now, actually. I'm just at the tail end of it, which is that I also felt this need to prove myself, to prove that I could do this, that I could be an amazing writer, but to also get paid for it because they're like, you're going to starve. And I'm like, no, I'm going to make this work. And so
Yeah.
I had a bit of early success with my series called Shadows in the Water. That was my most popular series. It was like a blend of mostly crime thriller, but then a hint of fantasy to it. And so it was selling well. And I was like, I'm just going to buckle down and I'm going to write a bunch of books in this series and I'm going to pay all my bills and it'll be great. But I kind of like boxed myself into a corner because it really started to strip me creatively. It became really exhausting. I ended up writing 12 books in that series in a span of like 7, 8 years. And so it was really fast. And I was doing other projects too. So this was just the shadows. I was also writing other books. And so I was really kind of drawing from the creative well. I wasn't replenishing it. I was burning myself out. And I thought I was doing it in the name of like, my ambition or this is what I want, but it was really not balanced at all. And so now I'm kind of what you were describing, where I'm figuring out what does it look like to honor that part of myself, but not
Yeah.
to cage my creativity in a way, because part of the burnout I think came from this belief that if I stopped or I wrote something else, that my fans wouldn't read it like they would love me, or my finances would fall apart. But that was a
Yeah.
really toxic relationship, right? Like, I only can write what I think you'll buy. That's a really
Right.
toxic place to be with your creativity, because you can't take
Yeah.
risks, you can't explore it. And so I'm trying to get out of that toxic relationship.
Totally.
But
Yeah.
it's a challenge for sure. It's really hard. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the spirit piece. Because I will say, I feel like when I embarked upon creativity, I was like almost like healing myself. You know what I mean? Like it was
Yes.
like, I'm gonna try stand-up comedy. I'm gonna be this like crazy comedian girl that my mom is like legitimately ashamed of and embarrassed to tell her friends about. But
Come on, mom.
that was me saying one, yes to who I actually am versus like who someone expects me to be. And then two, it was actually like opening up like a channel to me and like a relationship with spirit, with the divine. I didn't know that at the time. But like,
Right.
honestly, I look at the first time I did stand-up comedy when I was like having my quarter life crisis, like unhappy at this job where I had been sexually harassed and just kind of like miserable in life, just like it was literally like a Hail Mary. And that Hail Mary, like it was like I was like grabbing for the palm of God's hand. And I
You're
feel
like,
like,
please
and I didn't
get
know
me
it,
out of here.
'cause I didn't at the time see creativity as a portal to heaven. Like that's not how I looked at it at that time. But
Mhm.
now I look at my life and my career and I'm like, my soul is happiest when it is expressed. I
Yeah.
look at moments of self-expression as just like grabbing the palm of God's hand. That's that spirit pillar you're talking about.
Hmm.
When I did comedy, I grabbed it. When I built the brand initially, Awaken the Rebel, I grabbed it. When I wrote my book, I grabbed it. When I did my first TEDx talk, I grabbed it. There's these moments of just expression that are just like honesty and truth and creation, where your soul is kind of like getting to do what it came here to do. And that
Right.
cannot be measured in dollar signs, cannot, 100% without a doubt. That cannot be measured in dollar signs because it is priceless. It is the thing that's going to make you, what I talk about in all my talks, in all the ways, avoid that number one regret of the dying. So I know I might be like getting on a tangent here, but let's
No,
go, Kory.
you are welcome. Go. We'll go with you. We are going with you. Come on.
So Bronnie Ware, she was a hospice nurse, and she would literally sit on the bedside of people who were on their way out of this 3D life, right? Like going on to wherever the next place is. And she would just listen. And then she wrote a book called The Top Five Regrets of the Dying. So there are five of them, but I'm going to fixate on the top one right now. And it's, I wish I would have had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the one others expected of me. And so, like, I didn't know that at the time. I hadn't been coaching to like geek out on all the philosophy and the info, right? I just knew, boom, I was grabbing to do stand-up comedy. And in that moment, I avoided the number one regret of the dying, right? I was living a life true to myself, not the one other people expected of me. Did I make any money? No. Did I get any street cred? Maybe a little, I don't know, from somebody who I don't care what they think. You know what I mean?
Somebody in that audience thought you were super cool.
But it's like it didn't make any rational sense. It didn't pay me in dollars. Like there is
Right.
nothing rational or logical that would have propelled me towards a comedy stage. I was being completely irrational, which is why my first TEDx talk was called The Intelligence of Being Irrational. Really just trying to justify my own ridiculous choices.
You're like,
But
look, this
really,
makes sense, guys.
totally, right? Like to that third pillar of spirit, it's like, gosh, you got to have these moments where you allow yourself to just be a soul
Yes.
walking through the earth, like who's just kind of doing like, finally what it's actually meant to do versus what it's conditioned to do or paid to do or obligated to do. And so, yeah, that's where I'm like, man, I think more than anything, the one that's like saved me, saved my soul, saved my heart is that pillar of spirit. And all the other ones, I'm like figuring out, like, how do I honor these spirit choices I'm making because they're kind of nuts. And and luckily the dollar signs are starting to justify it, but I do
Hmm.
feel like artists are living on the edge, man. They really are.
Oh, for sure, for sure. There's so much going on mentally where you're like, am I crazy? Is this a bad choice? Am I making a mistake? Like there's so
Totally.
much self-talk that has to be mitigated as you're moving
Yep.
forward, for sure. And it definitely sounds like you've had your experience with that.
Oh,
But
I'm
it's
just
paying off. So the rest
yeah,
of us who are still trying to figure out if we're nuts or not, at least you're getting some positive feedback from the
exactly.
universe for your choices.
Oh, yes. Here's your positive feedback. You're not crazy. In fact, it's crazy not to honor your soul. I think that's why a lot of our nation is literally insane. Okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I actually think when people like don't express their purpose, when people don't be who they are truly are on the inside, they like the creativity that's meant to come out turns on itself. You know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
turns on itself and it actually becomes a form of like self-harm. It's almost like I'm gonna be weird now, but like I've joked
I always love it that you preface it. You're like, I'm gonna be weird. Here we go.
get ready for weird because it's about to come. Like if it's almost like you're creatively constipated. So just imagine like you literally have a poop that needs to come out of your body. You are compelled to push and get it out, and then you just hold it in. You
Yeah.
hold it in, and then what happens? It like poisons you from the inside. That's what I think happens with people's creativity when they don't let it out and express it and they hold it in and they force it to shut up and they force it to be quiet. I think it starts to poison their insides. And that's why we have statistics like the Harvard public health did a study about people who suppress their emotions are 30% more likely to die of premature death and 70% more likely to be diagnosed with cancer. Like,
Mm,
so this speaks to that, I think, second pillar, right? Like mindset, emotions. I don't know. What do
right.
you think? You tell
Yes,
me.
it does. It does.
Totally. So, like, there is an element of like, you need to be a well cared for human who allows yourself to be a full human instead of suppressing your emotions to fit all these ridiculous and asinine social norms that we've created so that you are not at risk of being the 30% who die prematurely or 70% who get cancer. Like, it's just kind of interesting because, like, that's where I think like creativity is medicine, creativity is life force energy. And when you don't let it flow through you, it'll turn on you and kill you. Like, not to be the drama queen in the room, but
No,
like,
no, I've said something
hey,
very similar, which is that for me, a lot of my creativity stems from imagination, right? Imagination is a skill. I'm very clear on that. I talk about most people are like, I don't think I'm not a creative person. I'm like, it's a skill. I was like, you could just use it and it gets better. And the more you develop a particular kind of skill, in my case, writing, the better you get at that. But if I was to pick up a paintbrush, it's like I'd be terrible at painting, but no one would look at me and say, Kory, you're not a creative person. So there's a difference between skill and innate ability, right? And so everyone is creative. It's just whether or not they develop skills. But my principal uses a lot of imagination, right? I have a really well-developed imagination. But when I don't channel that well, that imagination becomes anxiety, in which I imagine all the worst possible cases in excellent detail about all the things that can go wrong, right? My imagination can be used for good to create worlds and to help people think about things in different ways and to solve problems, or it can swing into anxiety and catastrophize. And so it
yep,
is definitely a balancing act. So I know exactly what you're talking about when you say that. You gotta
yeah,
stay in control. You gotta stay in the driver's seat for sure.
totally.
So I also want to ask you about, while we still have some time, the speaker aspect of your business, because I know that you are doing a lot more speaking now in recent years. You started as a coach, but now you are developing the speaker aspect of your business, and you're amazing at it. You've given two TEDx talks, you've done keynote presentations, you're fantastic, fabulous. How do you think the speaking has played into helping you develop your relationship with yourself? How has it helped you either creatively or building your self-confidence? What do you think it has brought to your life and sharing your voice and your stories? Because a lot of us struggle to speak up and share our voices. So what can you give us there for some wisdom?
Gosh, there's so much there. I think, my career didn't like feel right until I started in speaking, actually. Like, my story goes, I was the immigrant kid who just conformed and wanted the conditional love my parents were offering up. And then I broke out of the mold, when I did stand-up comedy. And then for a long time, it was like me figuring out like who am I as a creative type? Who am I as an entrepreneur? I remember doing comedy for 2 years and then being very confused when I abandoned comedy and went all in on coaching. Now, I've been coaching at this point for almost 20 years, so clearly it was the right choice, right? It was something that my ADHD, very distractible brain would still be able to do 20 years later. So to me, like that was the right choice.
For sure.
At the time, I was like, what am I doing? And then does this mean I don't care about being a creative type anymore? Eventually I realized comedy is amazing because it helps you transcend pain, right? So, and coaching is amazing because it helps you transform. Moments of pain become moments of transformation. So I started to see them a little bit as like an improvisational, one in the same energy. It eventually started to make sense to me. And then I wrote my book and I was like, okay, there's the creative type again. There she is. I mean, that was like a decade later though,
There
So I
she
was like,
is,
oh,
like she was
cool.
hiding.
Yeah, like she made an appearance. She dropped a few cuss words and a few jokes along with some history and some data, like boom. And that felt really good. But it wasn't until like 2 years after the book that I did the TEDx talk. And that's where I was like, oh, the comedian plus the coach is a speaker. Duh. Like, why did it take me so much time to get to that place?
Yeah.
And I just think that was my karma. That's what I was meant to do. That was my dharma. I think I was meant to like spend all the time listening to people in coaching sessions to understand like what the number one regret of the dying is, right? To understand like what do people's souls really want versus like how we're living. So it is what it is. It was what it was. But I will say, like, once I did the TEDx talk, it was like click, click, boom, let's go. Let's go.
Right.
Let's take
It made
back.
sense. It brought it all together. You're like,
It really
ah, I
brought it
see it. I
all
see it.
together. And then also what's nice about keynote speaking is it's a business. So I was like, okay, I'm a woman in business. I've been in business for years. I
I'm
can
an
make
entrepreneur. I know what I'm doing here.
totally. I can finally have a place in my business that honors my artist and honors my performer and honors my like philosopher geek on the inside, but also honors my pocketbook and honors my need for stability and honors my need to feel well paid.
Right.
And that was when it was just like life is good and everything is gonna be okay. I get to be all the sides of myself and all my needs will still get met. Yeah, it was a big freaking deal to land on keynote speaking, to understand the business of keynote speaking, to begin to figure out how do I make this really happen for real and not just have it be like one here, one there, once a year. Um, I think when I landed on keynote speaking, it did two things for me. Like one, it made me feel justified almost like in who I am. I think in a lot of ways, as a woman of color, right? We all have our like little dings that give us a little less privilege than the next homie. Um, I have not ever felt truly like heard. You know what I mean? I have
Yeah.
always felt like a struggling, striving, trying artist who maybe not enough people gave a shit about what she had to say, and it didn't feel right. Like in my heart, I was like, I just feel like this matters. I just do. I can't stop feeling that. I wish I could, truly. My life would be easier. Like, you know what I mean? But it was like I
Yeah.
couldn't stop feeling like this mattered. And so, but when you do a TEDx talk, then you have a TEDx logo behind your words, behind whatever you look like or sound like, people start to listen. And I just feel like that just changed everything for me. And then being able to parlay that TEDx talk into a legitimate keynote speaking career made me feel like, okay, like now I get to, without feeling silly about it, be a thought leader, say what I gotta say, get paid for it, get flown around the world to say it. It's not a joke anymore. It was like
Yeah.
almost the art finally came to fruition. And I didn't feel like a striving artist anymore. I felt like a legit thought leader who was well compensated for her art, for her impact, for her soul, for her unique contribution. I mean, woo, the validation after all the struggle
I bet. Yeah, I bet it was amazing.
was a big deal. And then, the money. I was like, okay, all right,
You're like, and the money. Fantastic. That's
we're gonna
that's
be okay.
great too. I see
Yeah,
that
just that
definitely.
nervous system part. Like, okay, we're gonna be all right.
Well, and we both know that certain voices are not given as much space, as much time in bigger conversations. So I think any time
Yeah.
that a woman or a person of color can step into a space and share their perspective, their story is
Yeah.
important. And so I think that it's fantastic, if for no other reason, that you are finding your space in those ways. And as you said, that you don't feel silly. It sounds like you're taking yourself and your experiences more seriously. I think we have a tendency to like downplay it, like, oh, did it really? I had an interesting kind of similar experience, which is when I came out of my childhood and it was really bad, but I didn't realize how bad it was until I was out of it. And I would tell
Yeah.
people things and they'd be like, "What?" Like, what? And I'm like, "Oh, but it wasn't that bad." And because my narcissistic father was so good at saying like, "You don't know how good you have it. You don't." When I was your, so he was always like
Yeah.
downplaying anything terrible that he did or said or any kind of abuse that was happening. And so it is like that for a lot of people, which is where we
Yeah.
don't necessarily understand the ways in
Mhm.
which we've been made small, we've been suppressed, or we've been held back by our experiences. And so it sounds like now you're like, oh, like I can do this, I can take up this space, I can say these things, like it's okay. And I'm so happy for you. I want that for everybody. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's fantastic.
That is 100% true. I think in a lot of ways, when I was writing my TEDx talk and I was sharing that sexual harassment experience, I remember in practices, I would actually cry, like in telling the story, because I was re-accessing a pain that had been suppressed for a long time, a pain that I didn't even know hurt so bad until I started to write the talk. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I guess that's in there. I guess I did feel helpless. And honestly, it wasn't really until George Floyd and all of that stuff pop off that I started to realize no wonder I was sexually harassed. I was the
Hmm.
only woman of color in that workspace, and I
Mm.
was the only one who got sexually harassed.
Mm-hmm.
They just wanted me to shut the fuck up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, who do
Yeah.
you fucking think you are, fucking with all your confidence and shit? Like, get in your place. And I didn't
Mm.
think that at the time, as like a 22-year-old young college grad. I didn't think I needed to be put in my place for the color of my skin. I didn't think like that at all. I think we were all kind of not really understanding what goes on behind the veil in a lot of ways when it came to racism.
Yeah.
I know like the Black community knows. And so parents will have conversations with their children about like when you get pulled over, this is what you need to do because you
Mhm.
are in danger. People of color like me, like Indians, Asians, like people who are like brown or yellow, like immigrant kids, like their parents are not having conversations with them about racism. I think they like create this desensitization to discrimination because they're used to it. Like, oh, this is just part of being here. Like, this just happens. They don't talk about it though. They don't talk
Yeah.
about it. They don't educate about it. There's no world in which I would have thought, oh, because I'm a woman of color, I have to like, I didn't know. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And I was 22, 23, and then George Floyd happened when I was in my 30 somethings, and I was like, oh,
Like this is a whole thing.
why that happened. Yeah, I was like, oh. In the same way that when I was like, oh, you have ADHD, you're not a screw up. You just kind of like, this is your, you do struggle with these types of things. Oh, you're a woman of color. This is the way the world views you. So you might experience more discrimination than a white woman or a white man, right? I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, yeah, just no idea. Just no idea. Just flipping through,
We're
getting.
we're all learning what's going on here. None of us really know
But
what's going on. We're learning
But
as
to
we
your
go.
point, this is a lot of why I've created the speaking community, is because it's
Yeah.
such like a beautiful, it's my very positive and this is my form of activism. This is the way I'm going to help women gain
Yes.
more privilege. This is the way I'm going to help people of color gain more privilege. I'm not going to cry about it. I'm not going to scream about it on social media. I know it's true. I know it's real. Got it. Like I don't want to talk. I don't want to, I believe what we focus on grows. And I don't want to focus on the problem because I don't want the problem to grow. So
Hmm.
I'm just going to focus on the solution. And to me, a very quick, easy solution is like, let's help every woman or person of color who has the dream of becoming a TEDx speaker or a keynote speaker get that dream because that will balance privilege in their favor. I
Right.
love it. It's like so beautiful.
Love it.
Let's
We love
go.
it. We love it. Approved. Rubber
Yes.
stamp of approval. Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit more. So you are building a wonderful community of speakers. I know the revolutionary speaker community. I'm a part of it. You and I met in another speaking community. That's how we kept keep traveling. And I'm like, oh, I like her. She likes me. Let's be friends. And so there is definitely power in community. There's definitely power in building people up. So tell us a little bit more about the community, but also maybe why I guess, advice or tips for people who might be reticent to join a community. This goes back to that fourth pillar about connection. Like if you've
Yeah.
burned, or even if you're just burned out and you're scared to like put yourself out there, you think you're going to get more rejection,
Mm.
more pushback. What
Yeah.
can you say to that that might help
I can
people?
say that you are going to get more rejection and more pushback. And because of that, you need support. Like you need support. You know, when I
Yes.
was in my like earlier years of figuring out who I was and what I wanted to do and kind of like starting to step out of my box, I did have a coach and I did have a community from that personal growth seminar I went to, from the personal growth space. I don't think I would have changed my life at all if I didn't have those people in my corner. I think your environment is incredibly powerful. So if you're one of those like, I'm gonna do it myself and I don't need the help and I don't want to like be vulnerable and be in this group of freaking weirdos who's doing all this weird stuff, I'm just telling you, like, you're just gonna make it harder on yourself, you know, because I'm not gonna say you can't do it. I think you probably can, right? Like, I believe in the power of the human will, and also it's hard. It's very hard. There's a lot
Yes.
of self-talk you're going against. There's a lot of fumbling through and figuring it out you got to do, not navigating uncertainty. There's a lot of like the navigating uncertainty that will make you want to question yourself and like, is this even worth it? And in those moments, if you have a group to support you who's also in the same path, journey, struggle, you are a lot more likely to be like, you know what? We gonna be all right. Like we can do this. Let's keep going. I also created the community because, like I said, like in for me, accountability has been like an anchor. Like I don't make anything happen unless I am accountable to someone who I will feel embarrassed, I disappointed. Like call
Yeah,
it
I
Amy.
always feel way more like I'm way more scared of disappointing you than disappointing myself. And so I'm gonna
Totally.
show up. I'm gonna show up and do it for you so that I don't
A
disappoint
hundred
you.
percent. Yes. And so for that reason, I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's just worked for me. I mean, I've created what I would consider to be a dream career, really just by having coaches or programs or communities to create an environment or give me information I need or hold me accountable or just move me forward just that one step. My whole life at the age of the ripe old age with all these gray hairs of 42
Oh, you're gorgeous. Hush.
is a
Not
lot
everyone can
more.
see it. Some of this is going to be on, I mean, all of it's going to be on Spotify, but also YouTube. So some of them are not going to be able to see how amazing you look today if they're listening on Spotify, but you look fabulous in your blazer. Let me just describe it for the listeners only. She's in this gorgeous, like camel colored blazer. She's got a sleek black shirt underneath her, super sassy. Looks like she's that designer who played, was it Miranda in Devil Wears Prada? Those glasses, fabulous glasses. And she's got this gorgeous hair that's like sleek and this like streak of gray. So I don't know. She looks like she should be the editor of Vogue, but here she is talking to me on my podcast.
I'm in a podcast with you every day, Kory. Okay.
So yeah, so now the listeners can visualize your amazingness. Continue as you were.
You're so sweet, and I'll take it all day. And now I've lost my train of thought
No, I'm
completely.
sorry. I activated the neurospiciness. My apologies. You were telling me about the amazingness of a community. And actually, I'll lead you back into it with this fantastic quote that I heard recently, which is that the wrong people will teach you that you're
Mm,
strong enough to go alone, but the right people will teach you that you don't have to. And I
you
think that
don't.
that's exactly what you were getting at when you're talking about the community and what it has to
Mhm.
offer other people.
Yeah. I mean, there's been so many moments where I'm like, can I do that? I don't think I can do that. And then I see like a coach and I'm like, they can do it. And like, I'm similar to them for XYZ reasons. And if they can do it, like maybe I can do it. And honestly, that's really why I created the community. I was like, because the truth is, you and I both know you can create a speaking career, right? Like you position it, you do the things, one, two, three, and it'll go. But it's scary.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so scary that you might not do it because it's that scary, right? So like that's the thing is I'm like, let me just hold your hand a little bit. Let me just give you the faith and the belief in yourself in moments where you might need some of that. Let's just do it together because otherwise it's much harder to get the things done. It's much harder to avoid that number one regret of the dying. So yeah, I love you being in there. I mean, I feel like that's a huge support for me. I feel like half the time, like you know way more than I do about all the speaking things. And I'm like, thank God for Kory.
And
You,
I'm over here just trying like, don't say anything bad about yourself. Just take it. Take the compliment, accept it, love it, fantastic.
and
Yes, thank
I
you.
mean, and you're
Three.
definitely like an author a bajillion times over, and that's amazing. I think most of the time if people want a speaking career, they usually have a book in them too. I just feel like it's that thought leader thing. It just goes hand in hand, like they got stuff to say. So yeah, I love you being in there because I'd rather do it together too, girl. Okay?
Well, the thing that's really helpful to me is that, or at least the aspect that I really need at this point in my life, is that the rejection starts to wear you down after a while. Like if you submit to a lot of things and you get a lot of rejection, you start to like, am I the problem? And just having some other person be like, what are you talking about? You're amazing. I'm like, okay, I guess I can go try for 10 more things now. So having
Totally.
that feedback, because when you are in a
Yeah.
very competitive space where there's just not a lot of opportunities, but there are a lot of people competing for them, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're not supposed to compete for them. It just means that, you're gonna have to expect the no's, right? The no's come. And so if you're a tender-hearted person like me, you got to learn not to take them to heart every time that you get a no from something. Like, oh, well, I was gonna do
Yeah.
a good job, but I guess they don't like me. Like whatever it is that we say to ourselves in those moments. So it's been really great for me to be less of a hyper independent person because that was definitely one of my trauma responses. Going
Mm,
back to the wrong people teach you have to go it alone. Like my early experiences definitely taught me that I had to take care of myself, that there were not
yeah.
reliable, dependable people. And so it had to be a one person silo. And so I learning to get out of that and to connect with people more because when you have really big dreams, you can't build those alone. Like you can't build an
Yeah.
empire by yourself. You got to do it with other people. And so I'm learning. I'm learning what that means. But it's been fantastic connecting with you and the other people in the community. So I'm so grateful for that.
Ah, stop.
Yeah. Okay, well, before we wrap it up, I got one last question for you. So, of the things that I like to ask people at the end, there is going back to the spirit pillar. Tell us what's bringing you joy these days. I always like to end on a happy note. So, what is making you happy? What's lighting you up? Maybe what do people need to check out? Reality TV. I don't know. Tell us more about what great
I was just
TV.
gonna say, I'm like rhythm and flow, baby.
What
I'm
what
not even
what should
kidding.
we be watching on Netflix?
I
Whatever. Like,
mean, I,
what's
I
bringing you
think,
joy?
yeah, I mean, truly, literally, I just came off of like, I watched the season finale the other day. I think there is something riveting about you're an artist, I'm an artist. We know what it is to be in our art and struggle and money and trying and figuring watching someone else do it. And like, oh my God, I almost felt like it was like therapeutic, but it was also beautiful. They had these moments where the art was so good, and you were like, oh my God,
They
yes,
deserve it. They
you know,
deserve everything they want. Give it to them. Yeah.
yes. And you're like, this is what we do it for, right? Like it's like the soul being expressed. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so good. And then just also knowing like it works for people sometimes. And like even the guy, flawless real talk, spoiler alert, y'all, he was like number 2. He ended up not winning season
Hmm.
one. He has a million Instagram followers now. Like he gonna be all right. Okay.
Yeah. He's
Like so
gonna be okay. We're not worried about flawless
yes,
real talk.
even knowing like the losses are still wins in their way. You know what I mean? Like it just was
Yes.
so therapeutic. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this so much. Not to mention, oh my God, I learned so much about like Atlanta. Wow. Like I don't understand how they come out of Atlanta talking like that. Like, like, and they're like, I fuck with you for real. Like that's just so like I understand the lingo, but I was like riveted every second and like, okay, learned about rappers I didn't know about. Anyway, it was a great experience. That's what's been bringing me joy lately.
Fantastic.
Probably just also like physical exercise. And also the gray hairs. Like I'm actually really enjoying this is a new
You
level
look fantastic. You really
thank
do.
you.
It,
Thank
it
you.
totally suits you. I know a lot of women get really self-conscious about going, quote, going gray, as they say, but I think it looks absolutely amazing on you.
You're so
So,
kind. And we're gonna like it's just a new look,
mhm.
like 42 plus, right? It's like, okay, instead of trying to keep up with the Joneses of maybe trying to look how I used to look when I was 20 or 30, let me lean in to whatever I look like now.
Mhm.
And I'll still try to make it funky and fun and cool, right? I'll put on the like sleek glasses and maybe a pop of red lip every once in a while. But I think it's like I think why it's bringing me joy is because it's another level of authenticity. It's honest. I'm not trying to be something I'm not. And as you clearly have heard from this, podcast interview, that's my jam. So it just feels aligned. I feel
Yeah.
honest, you know?
Meanwhile, I've got an appointment to cover this. I don't have much gray yet, but I get my hair's really dark. I saw this great thing from Dolly Parton the other day. They were like, how do you feel if someone calls you a dumb blonde? And she was like, well, I just remembered that I'm not a blonde. And I was like, oh. I was like,
Yeah,
yes. I was like, good point. I'm gonna go down. I'm gonna go bleach my hair now.
exactly. Love
So
it.
I'm not as bold as you yet. I'm still like touching up my roots with my blonde, but it looks fabulous on you. It really does. It looks great. So I'm going to continue this conversation with Shereen in the after show. For those of you who want to join us over on the Patreon, we've got a few final questions for her and a quick game of this or that. But otherwise, I want to thank you so much, Shereen, for being here today. You are amazing, sharing your wisdom with us, connecting with us. I feel smarter every time that I talk to you. And for those of you who want to learn all about Shereen and all the amazing things that she does, I'm going to put all of her links in the show notes of the episode, so you'll be able to access those. Otherwise, I will be back next week with another episode of A Well Cared For Human. And until then, please take good care of you. This episode of A Well Cared For Human was written and produced by me, Kory Marie. The music was by Late Night Feeler and Esther Abrami. If you like what I'm doing here, please consider visiting my Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to the episodes, as well as a monthly patrons-only Q&A, bonus videos, and more. Not to mention that your Patreon support lets me know that you find value in the show and want it to continue. You can find me on Patreon by visiting www.patreon.com/Kory Marie. If you can't support the show financially, that is okay. You can still subscribe to the show, leave a review of the show, and recommend the show to your friends, not just the neurotic ones. All of this helps so much. And as always, thank you for listening.